it's 6:35. I'm going to start, and I'll just let people in as things progress, as they come in. So, all right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I hope this will be instructive. I'm not any particular expert on videography, but there's lots of I'm sure there's lots of tips to share. I guess there's a couple of points for those of us who are not professionals. I don't sweat it. I mean, we're not professional televangelists, and we don't want to produce a slick packaged deal that looks like televangelists. We want it to feel like our own churches. So to me, it's always been more important to try and generate the authentic church feel than to actually polish the presentation slickly. But having said that, obviously we want to do the best we can to get the message out there. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to raise right up front as far as my feelings about videography, and one of them is less common now. When people started trying to get online with just their cell phones, the shaky videos were hugely annoying to me. So invest in a tripod and a clamp for your phone if that's the way you're getting your video out there. The shaky handheld cell phones, it's just that's just appalling to watch for those of us that take some pride in the production. And the other thing is not exactly related to video, but people will watch video that's not 100%, but if the audio sucks, you're going to lose them. So make sure that along with decent video, the sound quality is the best that you can get. And we'll probably do a future session on audio, which now that I think about it is probably a really good idea for the next one. But it is important because people will they don't want to just watch, that they want to be able to hear it clearly, and if they can't hear it clearly, they'll be gone. So so those are my two big things that that irk me. If I can't hear it clearly, of course my hearing isn't that great, and so if I'm watching a service, I really want to be able to hear it clearly. So I guess we should probably try and figure out what people's level of expertise is. I'm pretty sure Daniel's way ahead of the rest of us since he's a professional, but are there any that are really really uninitiated as far as video terms and you know, what we're talking about with bit rates and resolution and all that kind of stuff? Or do we all have a basic idea of what we're looking at? Okay, Jennifer, thank you for being honest. So you're kind of starting from scratch with all of this. I doubt if there's going to be anything too so in depth that you won't follow it. So so what are you currently using? What are you? Oh, Jen, I can't.
All right, my sound is wonky sometimes. So right now I'm just zooming like with my computer. And when we were at the church, we were just using like an iPad.
All right.
So we haven't invested in cameras or anything fancy. The most I've done in my life is we used to have a camcorder when I was a teenager, and I did lots of fun videoing then. That's it.
Okay, I'm not going to say anything unkind, but that was a while ago, so probably not the same camcorders you would use now. Okay, all right. Okay. So the not quite sure how you want to proceed with this. I realize it's my session, but not sure how you want to proceed with this. But the there was sort of a list of things that just popped into my head when I was thinking about video terms and what we should all be thinking about in that. So maybe we'll just sort of stroll through it, and as we mentioned a topic, if you've got anything to ask or to contribute, jump on in. So if we sort of start from basic, almost everybody is filming in HD of some description now, but HD includes both basic HD at 720p, which is a 720 by 1280 resolution, and full HD, which is 1080p, which is that much better. Even though my equipment is fairly good, I stream at 720 because the difference in that resolution is unless you're looking at a really big screen, it's negligible. The real experts would disagree with me on this, but for live streaming worship, the difference is not really noticeable. And because I'm streaming from a rural church, if I was to try and stream a 1080p stream, I would need to hook it up differently. I'm using a rural wireless system now, and I'm streaming out at 1.8 or 1800 megabyte per second, which wouldn't sustain a 1080 stream. So I'm kind of stuck with 720, but we have people that watch it on a 32-inch TV and are fine with it. So that's fine. So aside from the video resolution, bit rates are fairly important as well. And there's been a lot of discussion on the group about bit rates and what internet bandwidth you need in order to stream out. And I'll maybe ask Daniel to jump in here in a minute because he actually builds these systems, well, as do I, but on an amateur basis. But a lot of the bigger churches that I don't know, in my opinion, they're oversold the bandwidth requirement, because we've had people, contributors in the group that have said that they're getting 20, well, it'd be 2000 megabyte per second upload, where I'm at 1800 or 1.8. That you don't really need 20. That's a lot. That will sustain a lot of data. So I guess the point of this is to check with your equipment and your suppliers and make sure that what you're actually streaming at is suitable to where you're streaming it to. Like, I use a company called StreamSpot, which is in I think they're in Ohio actually, and that 1.8 or 1800 yeah, it's 1.8 megabyte per second, sorry, is perfectly adequate for 720, and they stream it out to a link to my website and to Facebook Live at the same time, and that's perfectly adequate. So the people that say that you have to have 20 megabyte per second, if I'm streaming at 1.8 and they're requiring 20, there are probably people out there that are saying, oh, if we need 20, we can't get that, so we can't stream out a service. That's just not true. You can do less as long as you're matching what you're streaming out to where you're streaming it and the bandwidth. So all of those things need to work together, and they are very individual. Like the rules of thumb, I'm not a big fan of rules of thumb saying that you need any particular bandwidth. What you need is to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate in all the steps of the process. So did any of that make sense, or am I just sort of prattling on here?
John, I was just going to jump in. We're putting out 1080 at our church, and we're flowing at 7 meg out.
Right. Okay.
So that's a good baseline sort of thing that other people might think of, because I think your services go from about 2 to 3 meg to about 10 meg to about 20 to beyond sort of thing. So
yeah.
7
the other thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Deborah, just before you jump in there, the other thing to remember is if your system is requiring that you stream out at, say, for 7 at, in Walter's case, your bandwidth should actually be twice what you're actually streaming out. in order that any fluctuations in the internet bandwidth don't throw you off. Like in my case, I'm streaming out at 1.8. I require well, 3.6 roughly, but roughly a 4 megabyte per second bandwidth in order to comfortably stream out at 1.8. So just if everything requires 7 megabyte per second, don't just go with an internet connection that will provide that. Make sure that your connection will actually sustain twice what you're using. It's a good general rule that so that you're not skipping and dropping frames and so on. Sorry, Deborah, you were going to jump in there for earlier.
No, I was just going to say, I know this is probably contingent on what kind of computer you're using, what programs you're using, but where do you find all these numbers? What your bandwidth is, what your, like, I wouldn't even know where to find those numbers.
Yeah, when you, okay, Daniel, you can jump in here in a second. Generally speaking, like for me, I'm streaming to a StreamSpot. They're the sponsor, so they have all of that data published on their site. Likewise, if you're going to stream to Facebook Live, there are recommendations on Facebook for what you need to be putting out and what works well. Same thing with YouTube Live. There's everybody that hosts streaming will tell you what their service recommends or requires. So it very much depends on what you're doing and where it's going. But almost everybody will tell you what their system requires. And I mean, I assume everybody else is very much like StreamSpot. They give very clear instructions on what you should set up. Sorry, Daniel, jump in there.
Sure. Well, let's just review a few things. First of all, let's get our terms correct. Speed is expressed in megabits per second, Mbps, small b, okay? Megabytes per second are going to be a large B.
Okay.
So let's kind of get that squared around, because otherwise you'll get all confused when you go out on the web looking at this stuff if you don't have your terms correct.
Okay.
Okay, so the second thing is 720p. Resolution on 720p, if you're streaming it, not streaming, if you're looking at it natively, is 720 by 1280.
Right.
Okay. 1080p, the resolution on that is 1080 by 1920.
Right.
Now, this is where there's a lot of confusion. When you stream that, or actually when you're CDN, Content Distribution Network, right? Everybody understands what that term is? That's like if you stream to YouTube, they turn around and stream it back out, they're the CDN. So CDN's a really important term for everybody. So when they stream that back down to your website, and let's just use websites as an example, not so much YouTube, those other ones, and you're streaming it up in 720, they turn around and stream it down. So the frame that you put into your website may be different. So what's important is that you've got a 16 by 9 aspect ratio iframe set up in your website, so that whether it's 1080p or 720p, it's going to display correctly. It's not going to skew like this. Okay, so if you were streaming standard definition video, you would be streaming in 4:3. Okay. So I think it's really important to understand all that. Now, 1080, 720p. So when is it important? When is it not important? 720p is quite acceptable. When you're streaming 720p, when you fill it up full screen on a 1080p monitor, it looks reasonable. Okay. 1080p, when you stream it and you fill it right up on a 1080p monitor, it looks pin sharp, because the streaming thing is actually giving you those pixels. And so it's as sharp as it's going to get. So if you've got the bandwidth, you should stream in 1080. If you don't have the bandwidth, 720 is going to give you a good result. And there you go. Try not to go any lower than that. In today's day and age, I mean, when I first started this thing out, we used to work with 500 kilobytes per second, if you can believe that. Man, you didn't get much of a frame at 500 kilobytes per second, okay?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. As far as speed is concerned, the magic rules that I live by are 720p takes 3 megabits per second. That'll give you a very successful 720p frame. It allows enough headroom, so if there's any issues with the encoder or, you know, things of that sort, it won't buffer. Now, here's the thing that people don't understand. Theoretically, you could probably stream that in 1.5 megabits per second and get away with it. And it'll all be good until somebody moves quickly. When they move quickly, that encoder, whether it's your computer or whether it's your iPad or whether it's a hardware encoder, that encoder's got to keep up with things. And so what it does is it stores it, it buffers it. And the more it buffers, then the more chance there is for you to go burp, 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 like that. All right. So if you have enough bandwidth set aside, that it buffers it into memory, and you don't get this stuttering across the screen from your encoder. Now, as pastors, this might not be too serious for you because, you know, most pastors don't move very much. But if you're doing sports, this is a really big deal.
Yeah, we don't do many sports in our churches, but that's
yeah. So you know what? I mean, if you use 3 megabits per second, folks, on 720p, you're going to have a very successful stream. Now, if you jump that up to 1080p, it's 7 megabits per second is the really safe figure to be at. It will stream with less, but 7 is where I'd like you to be. All right, so I'll just jump in with those two and, you know, turn it back.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, the thing that always sticks in my mind, because I was doing this mobile for too many years, our churches tend to be old infrastructure. United churches tend to have been built in the 60s or before, and I was finding very seldom could I get enough to sustain, well, generally speaking, more than 3 or 4. That was very uncommon. I think St. Andrews actually has decent connection. Theirs is I think a little over 10. So they are capable of doing more. But a lot of the churches were, and we still have some that would like to be doing this that are less than 1. So it's that's absolutely brilliant. I've done it from there before, but on very, very, very shady. It's not a pleasure to watch. So no, those are good numbers, Daniel.
Just jump in with one last thing I forgot
Sure.
to mention.
Yep.
The other figure that you should be really aware of is what's your total usage for a service. And if you're streaming in 720, it's probably 3 gigabytes. If you're streaming in 1080, it's probably 5 to 6 gigabytes. So that's the total amount of data that you'll actually use. And why that's important is your fallback when you run into trouble with your internet service is always going to be your cell phone. And so you should actually just sit there with a hotspot ready to go in case the internet dives on you. And so what you need to understand, though, is that's how much data you're going to use up on your cell phone, and that's what it's going to cost you.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because for those that are using cellular signal, that's a fair data load. Yeah. Okay. There one other. Oh, sorry, Ken. You're still muted. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, John, you made the comment, you said the churches are old, but the age of the church has got nothing to do with the streaming capability, does it?
Well,
We're
no.
talking about-
The reason I was talking about the old infrastructure was just because internet connections tend to be not state of the art in our old buildings, and a church with big old stone walls, you're not going to get a great cellular signal inside there either. So that's the only reason I was mentioning that. No, you're absolutely right. It's not directly related, but the fact that we have old buildings means that, generally speaking, and again, this is a generalization, a lot of the churches are much more modern than this. But in my experience, a lot of our churches are lagging a little behind in technology, and the networks are not real high bandwidth. So that was what I meant by that.
Yeah, but partly some of that is related to what you can get in the area where you're located, right? What your
Absolutely.
service provider will give you.
Yep, absolutely. For
And
sure.
what they're actually providing, even though they say they might give you something, they might not be providing it.
And the other thing to remember, of course, and this is diverging a little bit from the video discussion, but make sure that when your internet providers are quoting numbers to you, that what they're quoting you is the upload speed, not download, because the upload speed will be, generally speaking, much slower. They'll like to quote give you the download speed because it's a much bigger number, but the download is of very little importance for streaming. It's purely upload. So make sure that the number that you're looking at and the numbers that Daniel gave you earlier, those are upload speeds, not down. Okay, so just be clear on that. So back into video for a minute. One of the other things that in churches, at least in my experience, is lighting. Lighting for video tends to be fairly critical. And again, I imagine Daniel probably has some thoughts about this, but I find that the churches tend to be lit for mood and for ambiance for a worship service, which is not the same thing as lighting it for video. Often the lighting in the sanctuary needs to be supplemented. My own church, when I started there, the first thing well, not the first thing we did, but very soon we ended up adding some supplemental lighting, just LED lighting. We spent, I think we spent about 600 on lights. It doesn't require that it be hugely expensive lighting. St. Andrews actually has one of the better lighting systems around because they have a light board and they control the lighting depending on what's happening on stage, so they can put on a much better show than most of us. I've just added supplemental lighting so that it fills in, so that people's faces aren't in shadow, so you can clearly see the minister and so on. But lighting for churches is lighting for video is, in my opinion, fairly important. And like I say, our churches tend to be a little on the dark side as far as videography, and that will affect what camera you're choosing as well when you're trying to set up the system, because if you need something that's good in low light, that's an entirely different thing than what you might use in a studio that's well lit, or in a church that has really good lighting. So it becomes part of that whole discussion.
You also might want to add that you have to watch what's behind the people involved. Like if there's a very bright source behind them, the camera will shutter down because it'll pick up that as the bright spot. So you have to really watch the background of what people have behind them and decide accordingly. Some churches have stained glass. Ours has a big window above. And when you pull out the shot, as soon as you go to pull out, as soon as it gets that window, the picture just darkens right out because of that bright window sort of thing. So people may have to change where their camera is to eliminate those bright backdrops that might affect their camera.
It's not that's a good point, but it's not just the bright backgrounds either. The church where I first started recording services, their background screen had vertical oak slats every 4 inches for the whole screen. And when you move the camera, that would throw off the focus because the camera's trying to pick up that vertical pattern, and what you're actually wanting to feature is what's in front of that pattern. But the pattern, I don't know if confuses the camera is the right term, but it used to be awful to try and film from there. I ended up aiming across so that the person at the pulpit wasn't in front of all those slats, just because the background is if it's really busy, that can be a focus issue, at least in my experience.
Or distracting like behind me. Anyway, I'm sorry I have to go, but I look forward to seeing your recording. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Walter. Yep. Justin.
Yes.
I see your comment in the chat there. Can you run? Can you just sort of walk us through that discussion? Because the sorry, I'm just reading the note there. So what part of the discussion were you tending to disagree with?
Well, in regards to your resources, as you say, we were running a DSL connection,
Right.
which was extremely slow.
Yep.
And
Yep.
with multiple routers, we have two different buildings. We have our main sanctuary, and about 150, 200 feet away, we have a Christian education building with gyms and classrooms and stuff. We were built in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yep.
So we're not historic 1908 stone type building, yes, but we're still limited. And Bell has recently put fiber into our network, into our area. And we've brought in Bell 5 into our main office, which is in the Christian education building, which is not in the sanctuary. And so my two sons and the minister and I buried Cat 6 cable between the router and the main office over to the sanctuary. Ran two cables, so we had one cable as a redundancy in case we didn't quite get something right.
Yep.
And we're
Good
now
thought.
running that. And with direct connect in the sanctuary with 800 upload on a 1.5 fiber connection. So it really depends on what your neighborhood has. Now, if you're in a rural area, yes, you are going to be limited. But if you're in a city center, like right now, we have three companies fighting for business, Cogeco being one of them, and they really can't provide. And with if you need to get more than 10 megabyte up without being screened back, you need to go to their extreme package, which is still limiting because they tend to claw back because they're on a network as opposed to a dedicated stream. Fiber is the way to go. We have two, Bell and another private company, but the private company hasn't reached this section of city here in Windsor. So we had to go with Bell. So in doing so, we've now run fiber over to the main sanctuary. But as you say, lighting is another problem. We're running an old analog Canon high 8 video camera for one, and Canon something 80 as the other camera, and we find that the 80 tends to have a lot of problems with the low light levels and starts digitalizing and pixelizing because we're at the back having to zoom in. So once again, you are dealing with the digital zoom and everything else. We've since over the last couple of weeks have installed 4 20-watt corncob lights in our overhead lights, which have helped out quite a bit, but it's still not the perfect. What we're finding is once we zoom out, we end up having to rebalance the white level back to a 60% gray. Otherwise, the communion table just whitewashes completely out. So I've suggested that we put in some banners and behind to help bring back the natural lighting back down to a darker tone. And we are now looking at an XA 50, which is 4K in, 4K out. So we can look at having getting one large image and then looking at through OBS, taking in multiple smaller frames, which will still be a high enough frame and pixel rate to allow us to get high quality within each of those individual frame shots. Because right now we're running an high 8, which means that you're running 580. And as soon as you start zooming and cropping within that, you're then as you mentioned before, and one of the notes back to me is you're taking that 580 and knocking it down into, that was a big picture. Now you're knocking into a smaller frame, which is even less. So we're looking at a 4K input with a 4K HDMI output. The Canon XA40 is only a 1K output. So you got to really watch what those HDMI outputs are so that you're able to maximize into OBS so that you're able to frame capture your different shots appropriately.
Yeah, I use an XA11, which I love. I would love to be able to afford a 50.
Well, we're looking at different funding opportunities right now through different associations to see if we can get that 50. I've looked at different things, the XA40 and the 45, which you see, which aren't too badly priced. They're only 1K out through the HDMI. And then once again, you then have to look at your video capture card to make sure that it can handle 4K throughput as well. And then the other aspect that we had was really bad sound, and we eventually picked up a Mookie audio interface, which does an amazing job. It's similar to some of the others at about a third of the cost.
John, can I just jump in here?
Yeah, sure.
So let me give you a little advice on your system. Are you open to that?
Most certainly, yes.
Okay. You need to pick a resolution, whether it's 1080p, 720p, but pick a resolution.
Yep.
And then work all your cameras to that resolution. So let me tell you what your issue is going to be with that 4K camera. Your computer's going to be working crazy to put on a 1080p signal. So you're not going to pick up any quality at all because you're dropping it down to 1080 when you stream it. So even though it's coming in 4K, it's not going to look any better just because it's 4K. You would be much better off to bring that camera in at 1080p and just work with that 1080p image, pretty good image. And there won't be, you know, your computer won't be going crazy trying to keep up to that camera.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, so that's the first thing. The second one is, and this is just a general thing to anybody who's running a video camera, take it out of autofocus, auto control. Learn to use your camera in manual because your camera doesn't move around when it's in manual, and you can set it up for the lighting condition. And even if you swing it off into bad lighting, it doesn't go, whoa, and then all come back on you again. You end up with a consistency of image. So, you know, those are my two comments. The other thing would be, you should take a look at a pan-tilt zoom camera, a PTZ. The prices have come right down, and for what you're going to spend on that Canon, you could buy a pretty darn good PTZ that's every bit as nice as that Canon is. And it gives you the ability to put a joystick and be in one location and, you know, not have to have a separate operator on that camera. So that's something else to think about. Now on lighting, I'm just about finished here. On lighting, if you have a well-lit church, that is, you have big windows, then the majority of the light coming in there, guys, is at 6,000 or 5,500 or 6,000 Kelvin. It's daylight, okay? And so when you turn on your lights internally, if they're older lights, they're probably at 3,500 Kelvin. And so you get this mixed effect. And it looks pretty ugly, to be honest with you. So you need to pick color temperature that you're going to work with. And if you have a church that, you know, is full of daylight, then work with 5,500. If you have a church that has older lighting in it, just confirm what the color temperature is, but, you know, normally they're 3,500. So that's what you're going to set your cameras up for, is those color temperatures, and that's going to help everything right down the line. The last thing I would tell you is this: the only thing that's important when you're shooting somebody is their face. That's really important. The face has got to look good. The eyes have got to look good. They're the windows of the soul. People will accept the fact that the clothes are dark and the background's blah, blah, if they can see the face. So, and that makes it particularly difficult when you're using cell phones and iPads and you're streaming to Facebook Live, because it grabs control of your iPad or your cell phone and it won't let it go. And it doesn't give you the ability to lock it down. You can't take it out of autofocus, for instance. Now that's only Facebook Live. If you're working YouTube or you're working your own website, then you are able to unlock using the Apple feature, you can actually freeze the focus. Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to get that out for you.
Thank you much for the input. I do appreciate it. John, can we add on to the agenda somewhere how to get greater reach on YouTube? I've gone from anywhere from 296 views right down to 63 on any one given week. Is it all to do with the thumbnails? Is it to do if you get a copyright, not strike, but a warning against you, do they automatically start clawing back? Different things like that. If we can talk about that later on, let's finish what we're doing right now, but or even time for another discussion.
Yeah, I might add that to an agenda for a future discussion.
Thank you.
Good point. Ken, you were wanting to jump in?
Yeah, I was wondering if Daniel would explain, give at least a name of a PTZ camera and approximate price. Well, we've only been able to find one that's really classified as a true PTZ, and we're looking at $2,500. Can you discuss that, please?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we sell PTZ cameras. Okay, so disclaimer here. I'm not trying to sell you a camera.
Okay, that's fine.
You can
Nice that you're honest.
Price comparison on AV. Go to the avshop.ca. They got all sorts of PTZ cameras on there. So you don't. But
Can you recommend one and give me a price?
Sure. Yeah, the cameras that we sell are Minray. They're Chinese. They're all Chinese. First of all, just all of them are Chinese.
In fact, a lot of them probably come out of the same factory.
They all probably do. They look the same. Yeah, Minray, Minrray, Minray, and you will pay between $1,200 and $1,600 depending on what feature set you want on it. But that'll give you a 20 by lens, which means a 20 zoom factor, or a 30 zoom factor. It is available. I've got one with a 30 on it right now, which is amazing, the reach on that thing. Then to that, you'll need to add a joystick controller if you want to have somebody control it. But if you're only going to do a single camera setup, it does come with an infrared controller, and you can set up presets. Now, here's the power of a PTZ. You can preset the position and the focal lengths that you want it to operate at, and you can assign them a number. And so you go 1, whack, it's wide open. You go 2, boom, it's on the guy's face. And you don't have to move it. It just does it itself. Mm-hmm. That's the real power of it. So, I mean, we have installations where they have one camera up there, and the the minister actually has got the remote, and she'll go, okay, bam, and the camera goes whack.
Mark's got one on his desk there.
Funny, actually.
Quick question for you, Daniel. That's an interesting point. That I find that I use a PTZ optics. One of my cameras is a PTZ.
That's a good camera. PTZ optics make a good camera.
It's okay. I certainly have nothing. There's nothing against it, but I use the joystick controller, which is expensive. And even with the speed dialed down to the absolute minimum, it still moves too fast to use it to move it in a live view. So I go to my other camera while I'm realigning the PTZ.
No, you can't move a PTZ. You can't follow somebody with a PTZ camera.
Right. Well, that was my point. If you're using a single camera system,
yeah,
in my mind, a PTZ is not an ideal choice because you have no choice but to be moving it around live.
I don't know about that. Most pastors don't move that much.
Yeah.
I mean, you get the occasional one that walks the stage, and for those guys, yeah, you have to have an operator on a camera.
Yeah, but generally speaking, when the choir is singing, you want a wide shot that encompasses the choir, or if the kids are down there, you want to open up to the front of the church, and that movement and the zoom back to the wide shot is not.
Yeah, that's what the presets are for.
Oh yeah, and I use the presets all the time. I use 9 constantly. So, but if you're doing it live, then that zoom and that motion is actually live, and it's not the same thing as a guiding hand on a decent tripod.
No,
so
of course not.
Of course not. I'm not a really big fan of using a pan tilt zoom if it's a single camera system, just because you have no choice but to move it live. That's just that's my preference. That's not necessarily gospel, but that is kind of my preference. I was just where I was going actually with Daniel with that was with the Minray ones, or I don't know if you're experienced with the Bird Dog PTZ.
Yeah, I know the Bird Dog.
Are they smoother at low speed, or are they all pretty much the same?
They're all pretty much the same,
Okay.
but the feature set on them changes. PTZ, have you got one with an IP joystick, or is it a Visca joystick?
Mine's a Visca.
It's a Visca. Okay, well that's That's kind of a low end system. I think if you were to get an IP joystick, you'd be more granular with it.
Yeah.
The one that we have is made by Minray, and we find it pretty good. We find we can set that up and it trails pretty nicely. It also has to do with the distance that you're shooting that up. Remember, it's varying voltage, right? That makes that all happen. So if you get out there strung out 300 feet of wire.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm lucky. My Visca line is only 12 feet up to the camera, so it's not.
Oh, well, then that shouldn't.
But the other thing that related to that is if you're zoomed in further, every little bit of movement will show that much more. So on a wide shot, the movement won't be as noticeable as when you're zoomed way in and taking advantage of that 20 times zoom. So.
Yeah, where you see that, we normally use that when you're looking at objects or you're doing cutaways. So here's an example. Suppose you're doing a communion and people are walking up and you've got a privacy issue. Nobody wants to be on camera where their faces are showing. So quite often what people will do is they will zoom out to a plant, or they'll take a look at a stained glass window or something of that sort, and then they'll put up a title underneath, just, this is communion and blah, blah, blah. And then they'll come back to it. That's where you use the big zooms. That becomes the big deal with them. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if you zoom that thing in tight, yeah, it's going to be like that.
Yeah, my camera is 60 feet back from the pulpit, so for me to tighten up on the minister, I'm zoomed out a long way. So any movement is noticeable. So.
Listen, one other thing I want to mention about that PTZ optics camera, just so everybody's aware, because people get stung with this, those cameras don't support standard video frame rates like 5998. Okay, and that's a real problem with them, because there's a lot of video switchers won't accept the PTZ optics camera because of that. PTZ optics sets everything at 60 hertz. Or 60 frames per second. And they won't come in on a number of, for instance, Roland switchers. They don't care for them. Black Magic switchers hate them.
Really, my Roland has never had a problem with the PTZ.
Yeah. Are you SDI in or HDMI?
HDMI.
Yeah, that's probably the reason why. If you're SDI in, then it wouldn't work.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Okay, that may be going a little beyond the scope of where.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. This is all useful discussion for the group. Ken.
I said that Mark has one on his desk there. Did you want to jump in there, Mark, about that?
Oh, I was just going to say that we're using PTZ optics. We have two PTZ optics 20 zoom cameras that we're doing. It's about 30 or so feet from the pulpit, but we're actually not using an IP or a joystick situation. We're just using a stream deck. So if one of the things, if you're trying to reduce your overall cost, Elgato makes what's called a stream deck. Basically it's configurable buttons that you can change the lights on and off. And using some companion software, you can actually program it so that you can do the zooms, you can establish the presets, and actually I can set the presets on the fly if need be. One other thought in terms of one camera setups, if you do have a Lyric software that you're outputting to your switcher or to OBS or whatever system you're using to stream, if you do need to do that movement, then flip over to a still or flip over to your Lyric software, then make your movement and then come back to it.
Right.
The other thing with the PTZ optics is they do have some really good plugins for OBS to be able to control it from OBS if you wanted to. We're using a Blackmagic switcher, so we're kind of the ATEM Mini Pro, but that's working really, really well. Just bouncing back and forth.
Okay, Ken, you were going to jump in there for a minute ago.
Not to take up any extra time, but can Daniel just explain? You talked about SDMI. What did you mean by that?
Yes, serial digital interface. There's two interfaces that are common in the video world. Well, there's a third one coming. but it's HDMI, which is the big plug, right, with the cable good for about 10 feet. And SDI, which is actually RG6 coax cable with a BNC connector on it. And that will do 300 feet. So I think we've got one right there. There's one, that's an SDI cable right there.
The SDI connection, and the advantage of that is that it actually locks in. It has a call it lock. So it actually locks in, where HDMI is pretty fragile for if you're moving around much.
But I prefer,
of course, your camera has to support SDI out.
Yeah, I prefer SDI simply because when you've got to mount cameras all around the sanctuary, you get up to distances 150 feet, things of that sort. SDI will run that.
Yeah, SDI really is more the professional grade video as opposed to HDMI, which is kind of consumer level, for lack of a better term. I think that's kind of the difference. I would, if I had the money to spend, I would have gone to the next. I think the Canon XA15 is a SDI out.
Yeah, it starts at the 15.
Yeah, I would have loved to do that, but budget said go with the XA11.
One other thing to mention, I hear a lot of people are running OBS. What to watch for also are cameras that have NDI. It's a new interface. It's put out by NewTek. And what NDI does is you take Cat6 cable and you plug it into your network. And then your network, of course, eventually works its way back to your computer, and OBS will pick up that camera off your network. And so, if you're running
basically,
OBS,
everything becomes a network resource.
Yeah.
The nice thing about the PTZ optics cameras are because they're power over Ethernet, you can actually just plug in a single cable, just a Cat6 cable into the back of the camera, and you're doing the NDI interface. And then Easy Worship 7 is also NDI compatible as well. So
yeah, the PoE is a really nice feature.
Yeah.
Sort of stepping back to basics, and this did get mentioned earlier. White balance is maybe a little beyond some basic systems, but for those who are using decent cameras, white balance is of some consequence. A lot of the cameras just get set to automatic, and that's it. Nobody really looks at, or people don't look at balancing for the actual specific location they're being used. But as Daniel said earlier, if you've got good equipment, if you've got a good camera and you have the resources to do it, look at manual controls in the camera and do the white balance and do the manual focus in that. And the difference in quality is fairly significant. I have, actually, mine is not as good as it should be, the balance, because I'm using one PTZ Optics camera and a Canon XA11. Well, those are wildly different sensors, even though they're both 1080p cameras, but the sensors are very different. So the settings are very different in order to not make it look really startling when you look from one camera to the other. You know, when I switch from one to the other, they should look very similar. I mean, they're not going to be identical, and they are aligned in different places. But both of them should be white balanced to the room and to the location that they're going to be shot, and try and get them looking decent together, so that it's not, you don't want it to look amateurish when you're putting together the final show. That's not the right terms, I know, but white balance is something that almost every camera, or every decent video camera other than a cell phone or an iPad, has the ability to set the white balance. And I'm not so sure about color balance, but the white balance itself, I think, is the more critical feature. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, so here's a trick on white balance. And really, John, you've brought up the issue. I have a Canon camera and I have a PTZ Optics camera. PTZ Optics has a Panasonic sensor in it. Canon's got a Canon sensor in it. They're probably running different color spaces. They don't look the same.
Right.
Right. So Here's how the videographers cheat that. You take both cameras and you set the color balance according to temperature. So instead of allowing the camera to set its color balance, you're going to go in and find the feature that says 3000, 3500, 4000, 4500. And you're going to use that feature and you're going to set it by eye. Okay, you're just going to keep moving it up and down until you get the two of them fairly close. Now, the other thing that you can do to cheat a camera that doesn't want to help you out is you can buy something called a warm card. I see somebody here was talking about a 60% gray. That's a bit of a warm card, by the way. And what a warm card does is it cheats the camera. It puts out, instead of just putting out white, it'll put out blue. The camera sees that blue and it says, oh, that's really cold light. I better warm up. So it starts to change the color profile. All right, and that's the way you cheat the two cameras. You just keep going at it between the two of them until you get it set so that they're pretty close. And
Sure, now you tell me the easy way to do it. I spent a lot of time playing with that. Yeah, just recently I had set them fairly decently, actually. They weren't too bad, and just recently I've had trouble with the Canon. Not entirely sure why, but I keep having to set the exposure level up every week. It defaults back to a darker setting, so I'm gonna have to play with that one a little bit. But so we've looped around and discussed a whole lot of stuff that may or may not be useful. There've been a lot of people have been quiet. I'd kind of like somebody to jump in and ask some specific questions and see if we can address it, because I'm sure that some of you have some questions that you might be interested in popping in here. If not, we'll just keep prattling on the way we're going. But Ken.
I don't want to monopolize. Lighting. Does anybody use any form of small, I heard somebody mention corncob lighting. Is that small LED lights that are used locally?
I think it's actually just cob, isn't it?
Cob?
I think it's just cob is a trade name for the bulb style.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I think he said corn cob, but I think that was a nickname.
Yeah. Okay. So does anybody use a light, like a local light at the minister's pulpit to give lighting just on him?
No.
I know many of the larger Pentecostal new frame churches are using specific stage lighting for all their presentations. I do know a couple of churches have also added light boxes or light umbrellas to if they're doing pre-recording so that they're out of the shot. But for live streaming, as I said, we've added corncob, which is basically 360-degree lighting. It's a cylindrical bulb with LEDs all the way around and below it as well, in about a 5000 K light level, just to try, because we have no natural light coming into our sanctuary. And that has helped out, plus removing one of the sides of the triangular lights to allow the light to be broadcast more forward than down. So try and get into the stage lighting without the true stage lighting aspects. But once again, it's very difficult. Some Sundays there's a bit more light coming in and it looks good. Other Sundays, no, there isn't. We're doing live stream, so we're just relying on what Mother Nature and what our lights can give. Also playing with the color levels with an OBS, and also with the LUTs level, putting a LUTs filter on a couple of the cameras.
You're going way beyond what most of us understand here. I'm sure Daniel understands that one, but not so much the rest of us. So the lighting that we added on in the sanctuary, which again for those who are looking a little more basic, it's just one of these light panels. This is a little tiny one. This is just the one I use when I'm using my camera remotely. But the LED panels, as long as you're shopping for the right ones, you can actually set the light intensity, what Daniel was referring to earlier with the Kelvin, for warmth of the light, you can set it to really intense, sharp white light, or a more of a golden tone, like the softer light. In our sanctuary, because we have a fair amount of daylight, I think I'm setting mine around 5100. That look fairly decent. But if you're going to buy whatever lights you're buying, you should really buy something that has the adjustment to set it to suit the room. And if you buy the really cheap LED panels, I think you'll find that they come the way they come. I don't think they're as adjustable. Maybe that might have changed now, but when I was shopping for it, the cheapest ones came at 4,800 or 4,600, and that was it. You couldn't actually adjust it to suit what you actually wanted in the room. So might be something to look for if you're buying lighting.
Can I make a suggestion on lighting?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now I'm speaking to people who don't have a lot of money to spend on lighting. This is another videographer's trip that we use when we don't have a lot of money to spend on lighting. Go down to Costco or Canadian Tire and get one of the standard high intensity LEDs that they use for painting. And make sure it's got an adjustment knob on it. It's got to have an adjustment, and read the box and make sure it's 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. And if it doesn't have those two, don't buy it. Now, that's going to give you a very high intensity light for 60 bucks. Trouble is that it's not a usable light the way it sits. And here's what happens is you'll set it up in your sanctuary. You'll be shooting at 24 frames a second, and you're going to find that you've got this banding coming through your video. And the reason for that is because the light's pulsing at 60 hertz. You're shooting it at 24. So it's going dark light, and you're getting this band all the way through. So the way around that is set your shutter speeds up to 30 frames a second, or 60 frames, or 120 frames. 60 is the best to be at anyways, really, for streaming. That's kind of the common denominator. Anyways, so once you've got that going, you'll have a light that you can use. And then you can go and buy some, and AV Superstore has got these, DV Shop has got these. Go and buy yourself a gel pack for videographers. They're only about 50, 60 bucks. They're not a lot of money. And you can clip the gel to the front of the light and you can diffuse it. So now you've got a really reasonable light instead of a glaring thing that's going to blow people's eyes out. And in these gel packs as well, they will have different color temperature gels. So they'll have 5,500 gels and they'll have 3,500 gels. And if you find yourself going into a situation in your church where it's 3,500 is the actual lighting temperature, then just put the gels on it. Gel it down to 3,500. These things are so intense that they'll blow right through that gel with no issues at all. The only thing I would ask you is make sure that you put it out in front and not right on the plate, or you'll end up with a hole in the gel. But they're not they're not as bad as the old lights. They're not as bad as the tungsten lights. Okay, so there's a very inexpensive way to get a light in there that might set you back $100.
So yeah, and that's a great tip. The economy is good. The only point with that one is that those are not particularly visually appealing lights.
No.
So if your congregation is in the room and you're doing this on a permanent basis, you might not want to go that way with the industrial look. But for right now, when the churches are locked out and you're just wanting to get a good lighting for your stream, that's actually a really great tip.
But one of the other things sort of relating to lighting and stuff that we found is that when we were doing our cameras from the back of the sanctuary and tripods looking toward, we have a white wall that's behind me in the pulpit, and it doesn't look good in the stream. So we've had to actually move the focus of the camera off to the side, so they're not actually focused on the front of the church, but off to a different darker wall, because the stream projects a lot better because the camera's picking up that whiteness of it, and it looks like a terrible stream, even though the in-person experience is fine, but just simply doing a live stream, it looks bad on a white wall. Just want to mention that.
That's actually a good tip. And it kind of plays into the larger theme of make sure that what you're doing is tailored to the location where you're doing it. There's a million instruction videos out there, and all of us that are giving opinions here are giving opinions based on our experience in certain specific locations. But every location is different, and it really needs to be tailored to that particular room. So that's a good point, Grant. Really good point.
Guys, I have to leave. I've really enjoyed tonight's conversation. I just want to leave you with one tip.
Yep.
One of the biggest aggravations I hear about on lighting are reflections in your glasses.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll tell you a couple of ways to handle that.
Please do.
Put your lights high and come down at an angle. That helps.
Yeah.
But the best, believe it or not, is give your pastor $50 and have them go get an anti-glare coating on their glasses.
Okay, that's just plain brilliant. I actually have that problem because the one of my ministers has glasses, and at her height, she's exactly between the lights and my camera, and so that is a constant problem. So the anti-glare coating on the glasses actually will help with that.
It makes a big difference.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
You just
Take
paid
care,
your way
guys.
right there. All right, thank you, Daniel. Well, that was an interesting point. Is there anything else that nobody really jumped in there when I asked before if there was anybody that had a specific question? Like, are you here because you're looking for something in particular, or is the wider discussion useful to you? Anybody that hasn't jumped in yet, give me some feedback here. Are we on the right track? Are we giving you useful information, or are we overwhelming you with data? Nikki.
I'm a communication coordinator at Stouffville United. Learned a lot this year. We went not live streaming or even videotaping to we have incorporated a ATM Mini Pro, and I used it for the first time myself on Sunday, and it went well. With 2 cameras and a third camera recording the PowerPoint projection. We had trouble getting the lady that does the PowerPoint. It's a VGA connection to our old projection, and we're having trouble even with the switcher box getting it to the ATM Mini Pro. So if you have any suggestions there, and we bought 2 Canon Vixia 800s.
Yep.
And the third camera is like a Vixia 20 or something. Yeah, so.
The 800 is what I'm actually filming on right now.
What's that?
The 800 is what I'm using right now.
Oh, yeah.
I've got it hooked up as a webcam. So
yes, we're happy with it. The lighting is an issue, but
great little camera.
Yeah.
For the price point. I can give you a little bit of unfortunately, I'm going to give you bad news with the ATEM series switchers. I spent countless hours with one of my churches. I built them a streaming system, 2 cameras, and then I was going to feed their projection in as one of the feeds on the ATEM. And like yours, it was a VGA signal. And as soon as you adapt the VGA to HDMI, the ATEM will not understand it. So I was, in spite of spending a lot of time, I was not able to get it to do what you're asking it to do. And what I ended up doing for them actually was buying another RF 800 and just aiming it at the screen.
Yeah.
So they're picking it up with the camera, because I could not. The ATEM Mini is a very useful switcher. For the price point, you can't beat it, but it requires that the resolutions be matched very well. And as soon as you introduce that additional feed, Is your ATEM Mini streaming directly to the internet, or is it going into OBS or one of the programs?
We're going to YouTube and then also recording it on an
Okay,
SD.
but to go into YouTube Live, or is it going to YouTube Live or recording?
Live.
Okay, and it's going directly from the ATEM Mini?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. Because the
Well,
other
we-
way to do it, if you're using the ATEM just as a switcher and feeding it into OBS or one of those, take your VGA feed, use a VGA capture device, which you can buy off Amazon for 30 bucks, and feed it in as a separate feed in OBS. So you're not actually running it through the switcher. You're running it as a separate feed. And then that overlays on your image that comes in from the ATEM. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but yeah, it's a way of doing it, because I don't think you can do it with the ATEM Mini. You might be able to do it. There's a funny quirk with those ATEM switchers. Sorry if this is not of interest to anybody else, but I'm answering a specific question. The ATEM switchers have a funny quirk in that they seem to set all of the resolutions by input 1.
Okay.
So you might try, if you've got an adapter that will take the VGA to an HDMI signal, try putting that in input 1 and then the cameras on input 2 and 3. It might work. I was told that was something to try for in my application, and it didn't help. But depending on what you're feeding out, it might be a way of doing it. But the other problem is, if it's a VGA signal, it's probably 4:3 ratio signal, not 16:9. So it won't match the. That's one of the reasons why the ATEM Mini won't see it, because it's a different screen proportion.
Okay.
So
is there a way to you can run a second computer to the ATEM and run PowerPoint on the computer and it take the.
Yes.
But then how did you get it from the computer to the current VGA projection? So that's.
Yeah.
Is there a way to do it the backwards?
Traditionally, from the computer that's running the projection, you just split the connection out. So one side goes to the projector, the other side goes into the ATEM Mini. But that's if you're using a signal that it will understand. If you buy a really expensive scaler to take the signal from VGA to HDMI, it might give you an output that the ATEM would understand. Because I never had the budget to buy an expensive scaler. I've never found one that would work. So I don't know that you can do what you're looking to do. Sorry to give you bad news, but in my experience anyway, that's not a doable thing.
Does your computer have the slot, the space within the expansion bays to handle another card? You could get like an HDMI graphics card coming out of your computer and just run another signal through that.
Okay. It's a personal owned computer, not a church.
Oh.
So modifying it might be frowned on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
The other option that you could do is, if you're running OBS, is to take your PowerPoint or whatever your screens are on, export them as PNGs or JPEGs, and then load them in and run them through slides as another video source within OBS.
That's actually, you know what? That's actually a really good point, Justin. You could actually feed that in as one of the other signals in the ATEM from another computer. Just load your. So it's a duplicate of the projection slideshow saved as images and feed it through into the data. That's a good point, Justin. That's actually.
Yeah, I know people who are doing NDI connections so that their main TV screens in their sanctuary are broadcasting through their HDMI, but because of the network, they can also then run those images through the NDI into an OBS source input. Now, what I do is I load the screen separately as PNG files, store them locally on the computer that's running OBS, and then I transition a background in that matches the music, so I get a double image, which is quite well received.
Awesome.
But John, I want to thank you for this. That's giving us lots of insight. I started off watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos and said, what are you talking about? And your input and ability to answer questions along with the rest of the group in the chats on Facebook over the last couple of weeks has been immense, and giving different ideas and different sources and different opinions as to how to go, especially with us being smaller finances rather than the huge mega churches with their complete stage shows and 3 and 4 edit rooms and everything else. I'm watching some of those videos and it's like, nope, I'm at the back of the church with two cameras and a laptop. How can I make this work? So yeah. I do appreciate this forum, and for you starting this up, I do very much appreciate it. And I'm sure most of us here do as well.
Thank you, Justin. That's very nice to hear. I'm glad it's being well received. It's been I know I get a certain amount of feedback at home that I'm spending way too much time sitting on the computer. But there's 474 of us now in the group in the 10 weeks that this has been going on. That's kind of remarkable. So I think I've pretty much expired the themes that I was thinking about. The only other thing that might be worth a quick mention is camera angles. I have watched a few videos where it was obviously somebody filming with, you know, just a cell phone, and they weren't doing my pet peeve and just hand holding it. It was steady, but they had put it down in front of the pulpit. So basically, it was looking up the minister's nostrils. So the angle was really thoroughly unpleasant to watch because it was just it was way out of plane. And I mean the way I've always looked at it, you want the people at home to be basically getting the same experience that the people in the pews would. So you don't want to be looking up at the minister or looking down on them. There have been ministers that I looked down on when they were preaching, but that's a whole different discussion. But so it is something to pay attention to, though. Is there's a tendency to keep the cameras out of the line of sight, you know, if there are people in the pews, which I guess they're not for most of us right now, but you want to keep the camera out of the line of sight so it's not blocking the view of the minister, but you don't want it to be off in such a way that it's giving you odd perspectives on the view. So something to pay attention to when you're looking at it. Make sure that what you're putting out there is roughly equivalent to what people would be seeing if they're actually, you know, in worship in the church with the minister there. It's just one of those things that if you don't do that, it looks kind of startling.
Now, John, I put in the comments, would it be possible, at least for those who are participating on this call, for you to get a listing and to publish on where on YouTube we can find each other's, not so much to criticize, but to either offer positive feedback or R&D, rob and duplicate ideas that are working well for other churches that we can implement into ours?
That's actually a great idea. And somebody actually started that after the it was either after the last, I think it was after the last session, including a link to where to watch. So yes, I'll do that actually. And I would kind of like to open that up beyond just this group of, you know, 11 or whatever it was, 11 or 14 of us. It would be really nice to have that list of resources. Absolutely. That's a great idea. How's everybody feel about that? Are you okay with posting? What we'll do tomorrow, I will post a link to the YouTube recording of this session. I can't do that from home because it'll take forever to upload from here. So I'm going to be at the church tomorrow. I'll upload it. It should be around noon. But when I upload that and put that message in, if you can just in a comment on that post, just include your name and the church and a link. Because that last time there were a number of people that included the same thing. It was useful for people to be able to look. And you're right. There's no use making your own mistakes. Learn from other people's mistakes. So watching each other is actually a really good way to learn. So that's actually a really good idea. Thanks, Justin. And on that note, if anybody has anything else specific, we'll address it. But failing that, we're almost at the 1.5 hour mark. So I think it's time to wrap this one up. And I'm not going to do a session next week. I've got a huge conference on for 3 days, and so I'm going to be buried with that. But the week beyond, I think, so that'd be 2 weeks from today. I think it's time to talk about audio a little bit and get into that a little bit for because it's fairly important for what we're doing, and I think it bears a session on its own. But anytime any of you come up with an idea of what would be a really useful thing to have one of these sessions, send me a message or post it in the group, and we'll try and schedule it in, because I find these extremely useful myself. It has never failed to trigger at least something that I could be doing better. So it's very useful for I think for all of us. So we'll try and carry on with this. And on that note, it's time to say goodnight.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.